Welcome back to WDAY. Jeff Kolpack joins us to talk about the weather a little bit. Some cold conditions coming in, Jeff.
You know, the weather is turning colder just for the Thanksgiving holiday. I know John Wheeler, our meteorologist, was talking about we're in that system and you got the cold weather pattern.
Hey, what are you doing? You don't do the news.
Doing the weather.
No, come on. Get over here.
Sorry, Sam.
Okay.
Gotta go.
Last year was weather.
Oh.
Now you're trying to do the news.
Can you let me channel my inner Dana Mock?
Here we are again. It's time for bracketology with the foremost bracketologist, Jeff Kolpack. So good to see you. And the second most awkward TV intro next to Butler Cabin. We have reached the end of the FCS regular season. Tomorrow is the selection show, which will figure out the 24 teams. Today was really interesting. You know, we were hoping for chaos. We got a little bit of that today. And now to try to figure out the 24 teams is going to be awfully interesting for the committee in Indianapolis tonight.
Yeah, I thought we weeded out some teams that were at the 7-win plateau and really had some chances to get to 8 wins and didn't do it. There were some upsets today. Some teams that really could have played their way in with 8 victories on the season didn't do it. You know, Delaware now is on the bubble.
Yes.
Had a golden chance. Lost to Villanova.
Chattanooga.
Lost
Mercer.
to Western Carolina.
Yes, that's a bad loss.
You do not deserve, I don't know, to be in when you do that.
Even Southern Illinois, Jeff, was still kind of on the bubble, even at 5-5 heading into today. If they would have beaten Youngstown State, I think they would have got some consideration. And the Penguins are at 7-4, and they're going to sweat things out, I think, tonight.
I think so, but they had, you know, what a good season for them, first of all. I mean, they were one of the teams that were just not very good in the Valley in the last several years. They turned it around on the bubble. We'll see if it's enough. North Dakota, I think, is in, okay? And they beat Youngstown head-to-head.
Yes,
they have the same record. After that, we'll see. They may be one of the last 2 in if they get.
There are going to be a couple names that we'll see, and we'll get to the end of this here in a second. I think they're going to surprise some people. Some names in this division that are not going to be part of the 24-team field.
Well, they're always going to have that. There's always 3-4 that believe they should be in. But again, when you have the chance to get to 8 wins,
gotta win the games,
and you're a favorite to do so, and you don't do it, you really can't say. You really can't. You know, cry foul on that.
So let's break down. There's 11 automatic bids and 13 at-larges. Let's start with the automatic qualifiers that won their league. Sacramento State, Jeffrey, wins the automatic bid out of the Big Sky, a perfect 11-0. We expect them to be the #1 seed come tomorrow.
Made a great case, undefeated regular season. They have a nice FBS win against Colorado State. Good for the Hornets and good for that area in football. FCS needs a story like this of a program to really, you know, make a rising shine in the division, and they did that this year.
Gardner-Webb wins the Big South in a head-to-head game with North Carolina A&T. That actually hurts the Bison because NDSU could have claimed, hey, we've got to win over a playoff team, but the running Bulldogs are going to the FCS playoffs with a win here today.
Relative newbie to Division I FCS football, the North Carolina school, which is in the foothills of the Appalachians, I believe, makes the playoffs.
William and Mary goes 10-1 and wins the Colonial. What a bounce-back year. They got an FBS win to boot. They're in the conversation of potential top 4 with 10 wins.
Well, and a good year. And then I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, they were 2-9, so they made a nice turnaround too.
South Dakota State won the Missouri Valley Conference, went unbeaten, 10-1. We expect the Jacks to be the 2 seed come tomorrow.
Solid #2, great season. They'll be rested and ready. 3 weeks off until their playoff game.
St. Francis won the Northeast Conference. I'm going to throw Holy Cross at you, the unbeaten champions of the Patriot League. Where do they go? How high?
I think the highest you can possibly put them, considering the strength of schedule, Dom, is probably 6.
That's pretty good for the Patriot League champs, 11-0 with an FBS win to boot. They beat Buffalo on a Hail Mary. The ASUN WAC champ, as we're taping this, just decided Eastern Kentucky ends up getting that. We had them on the bubble before we started taping this, but with all the different, I can't even get into the permutations of the computer on this, but Eastern Kentucky has an FBS win and a couple of good head-to-head wins, so the Colonels are going to get in as the champions of that combined league.
And the fact they are the auto bid, I think, will help Youngstown get a shot.
The Ohio Valley coin flip thankfully went to Southeast Missouri State. So SEMO is in after the infamous coin flip with UT Martin.
Well, UT Martin was not a playoff team.
7-4. I don't believe they beat anybody, though, to get in this field.
And I think the Missouri State loss really does not look good. That was their one chance at a quality win early. Well, we know what Missouri State did.
Eastern Kentucky, by the way, is a head-to-head win over Southeast Missouri State, so that's good for there. Davidson won the Pioneer League. It's only a matter of time before we see St. Thomas as the champion of that league. They're still ineligible.
What a great year St. Thomas had, 10-1, and was really one of the Class 2 teams of that league.
Samford won the SoCon. The Bulldogs are 10-1, and that is the hot topic right now. Their only loss was to FBS and the reigning champs from Georgia.
33-0 to Georgia, too. It's not like they got really blown out of the arena. Where do you put them in seed? I think they're going to be seeded ahead of NDSU.
Wow.
I do.
Interesting. We'll get into that here in a second. Southeastern Louisiana won the Southland. They had the head-to-head win, Jeff, over Incarnate Word, so the Lions are going back to the postseason for the second straight year.
Well, and they're a solid program, good program, and the Southland really was a two-team league this year.
Okay, so those are the 11 qualifiers that are automatically in.
Now we get to the meat of it.
Now to the at-large bids, and this is where it gets interesting. Obviously, we have NDSU in there. We have North Dakota in as well at 7-4. Tell me why you think the Fighting Hawks are in.
Well, I just you look at their losses. You know, they lost to NDSU, playoff team, lost to SIU, which is a pretty good team.
That's hurting them though now.
It is
on that one. The head-to-head win over Youngstown is a biggie, and they beat which we thought was a playoff team in Abilene Christian until today when they got beat by Stephen F. Austin. That win takes them down a little bit. But still, as Bubba Schweigert pointed out to us in the post-game press conference, if you're third of the Missouri Valley, you should be in.
Yeah, and the playoffs and the way the Valley has been in the strength of schedule, and they are number one in the Massey rating, the strength of schedule. You cannot just take two Valley teams. You cannot do it.
Montana State, Brett Vegan's team with an absolute blitzkrieg against Montana in the Brawl of the Wild. They finished 10-1, likely going to be the 3 seed in the tournament.
That turned into the boat race of the Wild today.
It really
that was pretty surprising.
Weber State had to sweat it out against Northern Arizona. They got the win. They're 8-3, and they're in the tournament.
They're in 8-3. They've, again, a solid schedule. I think the top of the line of the Big Sky was pretty solid this year, and deservedly so.
Okay, here's the first team that I think we could be wrong on. Idaho at 7-4. Jason Eck with a huge bounce-back year in his first year as head coach. They have the big win over Montana. They lost to UC Davis.
2 FBS losses.
They did have 2 FBS losses to start the season. They're 7-4. I believe they will get in.
I think today they beat Idaho State, the rival, which Idaho State is a one-win team. But I think they did just enough to sneak in toward the end there.
Next up is Richmond out of the Colonial. They lost that head-to-head with William and Mary. Still a really good year for the Spiders this season.
And another bounce-back team. Richmond had been some struggles after winning a national title over a decade ago, and just really never heard from. Made the dent here and there. Beat Illinois State in 2015. But, yeah, they're back.
They're in at 8-3. New Hampshire next up, also into the tournament. Good year for the Wildcats at 8-3, and they were just quietly out there. I look at the losses that they had this season, Jeff, UNH. They lost to North Carolina Central. That's a bad loss early on in the season. FBS lost to Western Michigan, and after that, the only other loss they had on the schedule was to Richmond. I think that's good enough, 8-3, to get them in.
And a nice win today. I think that
beat Maine in overtime today. They had to have that one. Now, you're talking about teams at 7 wins to get to 8. They had to have that to get in to the field. Next up is Elon. They were off this week at 8-3. Solid there. They were the only team to beat William and Mary this season.
Yeah, Elon, the Phoenix, I think a consistent season would be the word I'd put on them.
Interesting to see where they are. Now, next up is Youngstown State. This is another one we potentially could be off on. 7-4. They have the head-to-head loss against UND, which we believe the Fighting Hawks are in. They also lost to North Dakota State, lost to Kentucky. The bad one, Jeff, is the loss to Missouri State that could hurt them. Well,
in Missouri State, there was the mystery team of the year, but they're still a pretty good team. I still consider it somewhat of a good win. I mean, this isn't the Missouri State from 5 years ago when they were just god-awful. Yeah. I think it's still considered a decent win.
Bo State, by the way, finished the season 5-6. Youngstown got a late touchdown from Jaleel McLaughlin today to beat Southern Illinois to get to that 7-win team. Furman finishes 9-2. Really good year for the Paladins. They have a non-counter, so they're 8-2, but they're making it out of the SoCon.
It goes back to that old theory, Dom. 8 wins and you're in.
Yeah. The next team up is a real intriguing one. Delaware, which I thought was lock, stock, and barrel in. Then I had them out at about 4 o'clock today, and then the other results came in. And I think the Blue Hens are going to get in thanks to an FBS win over Navy.
Not the best of way to finish the season with 2 losses, but I think, again, you got to remember the committee takes your resume as a whole, and the Navy's a pretty good FBS win.
The quality losses factor. They lost to Elon, though, by 20, lost by 8, and though Richmond scored a late touchdown in that game, that should be, I think, enough at 7-4 to get Delaware in. The University of the Incarnate Word will be seeded, I believe. They only have the one loss, which was to Southeastern Louisiana, have an FBS win as well, and a boat race win over
7 seed.
I think so, at the bottom
seed.
half of that bracket. They're a dangerous team. I'm really interested to see what happens there.
Very good offensively, a good quarterback. They lost a great quarterback and found another one.
Lastly is Fordham. Yes, we have 2 teams out of the Patriot League in the tournament. Fordham finished 9-2. They lost to Ohio by a touchdown and by 1 in overtime to Holy Cross. I think they have a good enough resume that they deserve to get into the tournament.
Well, it's risky putting 2 Patriot teams in our bracketology, but I think when you look at comparing that to teams 25, 26, I think we think they should get in.
So let's bring it back out here to us. You'll not see Montana on there, Jeffrey. That's the biggie that I think people will look at and say, okay, the Grizz finished 7-4, lost by $1 million to Montana State, lost the head-to-head to Idaho. What's their biggest win?
Who did they beat?
Right.
Yeah, it goes back to you got to beat somebody. At some point, you got to beat somebody with some sort of reputation of postseason hopes and say, okay, today was just a monumental collapse.
Yeah, it was. It really was. And they had their starting quarterback, too, which I know you talked about in the pregame show. Thought, well, okay, if he's out there, maybe they have a chance.
Yep.
And they did not. You mentioned Samford at the 4th spot. Tell me why you think they have 10 wins. Only loss was to Georgia. Why they will be seated higher than North Dakota
I just
State.
think it comes down to basic wins and losses. I think it's nothing more than that. When you're 10-1 compared to 8-3, now you're not. It's not 1 game. It's 2 games.
Yeah.
And I think that's just enough for the committee to say, okay, if NDSU was 9-2, different deal.
They are 9-2.
Or 9-2.
Yeah. Here's the thing, because I'm really intrigued to see what the committee's going to do with 1, we believe Sac State, 2, SDSU. If the Bison are 5, then they're on the opposite side. But if they end up, if SDSU is the 1, then there's a potential they could play in the semifinals.
But I just think you go back to that 1-game difference, and that might be enough for the committee.
I'm interested to see here for NDSU where they go. And there's a couple other 10-win teams we mentioned, Incarnate Word and William and Mary. Would you put them ahead of NDSU?
Not at this point. I think you got to win your league, for one thing.
Okay.
It would be a
Incarnate
big
Word
deal.
did not do that.
Yep.
William and Mary did win the CAA.
They did win the CAA. I don't know. Man, you could go so many. I struggle. I'm struggling right now.
That's what I'm really interested to see what the committee is going to do. And Holy Cross is still out there unbeaten, and I know they'll say, strength of schedule, you got to play somebody, and the Patriot League certainly is not the level of the Colonial.
And how far has the Patriot League gotten in the playoffs in the past?
Well, we saw Colgate in the quarterfinals here, obviously, when they lost to the Bison. Lehigh made a quarterfinal bid. I'll be really intrigued to see how that comes out. All right, so what are we thinking? 21? 22?
22. Let's go with 22.
22 we feel confident about.
Those last 2 are a little,
The selection show is tomorrow morning, 11:30 on ESPNU. We'll find out the full field of 24. We're confident the Bison are going to be seeded and have a home playoff game. After that, depends on where they're going to go. Great to see the foremost bracketologists
again.
11
years now, right?
11 years running here with our bracketology show. For Jeff Kolpack, I'm Dom Izzo. That's the 2022 FCS Bracketology Show.